3, 2, 1, blast off. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the MSP Chat Podcast, your weekly visit with two talking heads, talking with you about the services, strategies, and success tips you need to make it big in managed services. My name is Rich Freeman. I'm the chief analyst at Channel Master, the organization responsible for this podcast. I am joined virtually side by side with your other co-host, our chief strategist at Channel Master, Erick Simpson. Erick, how you doing?
Well, Rich, I wish I could say I'm doing fantastic, but I've been fighting this weird cold for a week, and it's not enough to put me down, but it's certainly impacting my energy, and you might hear it in my voice. Apologies, listeners, but yeah, I've been fighting this for a week now, so I may have to take a different approach than I have been and go to urgent care and see about something. I've just been taking over-the-counter stuff. So that's how I'm feeling, Rich. Rich, I'm at home base trying to, pull through. You are not at home base. You're out on the road as you often are. Where in the world are you today, Rich? And what are you up to?
So I am in the great state of Texas. I am in Austin, Texas right now. I have been attending today a conference hosted by Evergreen Services Group. They are one of these sort of investment firms that are acquiring MSPs. I don't liken them to the typical PE with a typical roll-up strategy. It's more of a decentralized model where the companies they acquire tap into a central set of services, but get to kind of keep their own brand and culture. And and it's been interesting. The point of the show is really just to share a lot of what they've learned from the roughly 80 MSPs they've acquired to this point about running a successful high growth company and to some extent positioning yourself for a sale later. But it's really not an M&A show. It's more like a managed services best practices show. And it's been good.
Wow. Yeah. I'm sorry that I had to miss it because that's right up my alley. I would have loved to have soaked all that in because it is different than what we kind of expect, when you've got folks that are acquiring MSPs and doing that strategy. It's really talking about what works, what doesn't work, how to improve MSP growth and profitability from what I'm hearing.
Yep, absolutely. And it was free to get in, and so anyway, and it's the first time they've done an event, so kudos to them. They're off to a good start on that. Well, let's dive into our story of the week, Erick, and this is a little bit out there. I think some folks in the audience will regard it out there a little bit because we're going to talk a little bit about quantum computing. And to explain why we're talking about quantum computing now, given that it isn't really a thing in the industry at this point, it's more like something that gets talked about a lot. Let me take you back to June of 2022. Now, Bill Gates at that time, he was not actively engaged at Microsoft. He was mostly running his foundation, but he was still part of the organization, loosely speaking, at Microsoft. And because Microsoft was an investor in OpenAI, the OpenAI folks, June 22, invited Bill Gates out to get a demo of this crazy thing they were working on called ChatGPT. And Gates watched the demo. He dubbed the technology afterwards, quote unquote, an idiot savant. It sort of knew a lot of stuff, but didn't really know anything. And he actually went away from the demo, not only not terribly impressed, but actually a little bit relieved because there were all these other things he wanted to focus his attention on. And he went away from this demo thinking, I've got 3 years before I really need to be thinking hard about AI based on that demo. Well, fast forward 2 months, Erick, August of 2022, Gates gets invited over for another demo. And this time he watches ChatGPT ace the AP biology exam. And he was stunned. He was floored. And suddenly realized this was going to change everything. And a few months later, November of 2022, when ChatGPT became generally available, the rest of us were floored by this technology. And all of us, everyone in this industry has been scrambling to catch up ever since. And the reason we're talking about quantum computing, Erick, because I think it would be really, really great if we didn't get blindsided by that technology the way we did by generative AI. Now, right now, as we sit here, most of the leading minds in the industry seem to think that we're a good 5 years away from really needing to think hard about quantum computing, and specifically in terms of security. That's really what I want to kind of zero in on right now. Because by some estimates, if you apply a conventional computer to trying to crack one of the most respected, widely used mainstream encryption algorithms out there, RSA 2048, it would take a conventional computer something like 300 trillion years to crack that algorithm. With a sufficiently powerful quantum computer, you could do it in about 5 minutes. And so there is going to come a day when quantum computers become available to people, and they're going to go about cracking RSA 2048 and some of the other algorithms that are widely in use out there right now. And pretty much any safely encrypted file out there right now is just going to be wide open for anyone to look at. And so everyone in our audience, every vendor, everybody needs to be prepared for what is widely referred to as Q-Day. Q-Day is that day, the first time that somebody cracks RSA 2048 using a quantum computer. And it might not be 5 years away, Eric. If you just keep track of some of the headlines here, just a few days ago, really, as we're recording this right now, Microsoft introduced a processor for a quantum computer. Only 8 qubits. Qubits are like the quantum computing equivalent of bits. But the architecture that this processor is based on scales to 1 million qubits. I doubt it's going to take them, 5 years to get to 1 million qubits on a processor. In December of last year, Google got a lot of attention. They introduced a new quantum computer processor that they call Willow. They put it to work at RCS, which is sort of the gold standard benchmark for quantum computing. I forget the exact figure, but it cracked RCS very, very quickly in a matter of minutes. And by their estimates at Google, again, you ask a conventional computer to crack RCS, it will need, get this, Eric, 10 septillion years to do that job. That's a 1 with 25 zeros after it. The universe we live in is not that old. That goes back before the Big Bang. If computers existed before the Big Bang, they would still not be done. So there's actually a lot of progress being made. It is possible that it's not going to be 5 years before Q-Day arrives. And so a couple of things that people in the audience need to be thinking about now. And number one is embracing quantum safe encryption algorithms. Fortunately for all of us, NIST has been thinking about this for some time, and they have already rolled out 3 post-quantum encryption algorithms. They did that, the first 3 last August. They've got some more coming. We'll link to a page on the NIST website where you can read about those. The people I talk to say it is not going to be a quick, easy, or cheap thing to switch from whatever encryption you're using now to these new standards. It is not by no means is it too early to start thinking about that and moving towards that so that you don't get blindsided by that. A very simple thing that you can do right now to ready yourself is just take inventory of all the encrypted files that you have and your customers have. Because if you do get surprised, if you're not ready when Q-Day arrives, it will be, if nothing else, be very helpful to know what is vulnerable. And it will also be helpful because it turns out, Eric, that even though we may be quite a bit a ways, a few years, let's say, if not 5 from Q-Day, the quantum security threat era is happening right now. NIST got out in front of quantum computing. So did threat actors. They have been engaging in what the experts call harvest now, decrypt later attacks, where they are exfiltrating encrypted files they can do nothing with today, just hanging on to them until Q-Day arrives, so then they could break in and see what's in there. And so it would be a good idea to have an eye on what files are vulnerable to those harvest now, decrypt later attacks, and maybe secure those a little bit more vigorously than you're securing other files right now. Maybe get a read on what encrypted files in your position possession rather, may have been exfiltrated before, because you don't know, those files might be vulnerable to these, on Q day later on. And quite honestly, from what I've been told by the experts, there's nothing you can do now to protect those exfiltrated files. The key is getting yourself ready to make sure that data doesn't become vulnerable later on. So again, Eric, we would like to think we're 5 years, who knows, maybe more away from Q Day. I would not bank on that.
Holy cow, Rich. Let me unclench a certain part of my, body. That is horrifically scary. I just, when you're going halfway through, and I just, a scene from James Cameron's movie Aliens came to mind, where, the corporal is, the corporal is yelling, "Game over, man, game over." Right? He's freaking out. My goodness, there's this harvest now and decrypt later, that's going to create havoc, and everyone else is kind of on notice now, because how do you find the time to do this encrypted file assessment for yourself if you're an MSP, and how do you present this to a client in a way that they agree needs to be done and they will pay you to do? So there's a lot of friction in this whole process here. And I hope it's 5 years away, Rich, and not 2 months later, as in the story with Bill Gates.
Yeah, and the terror you describe, for me, it really is that harvest now, decrypt later, because my understanding of all these state level data privacy and reporting laws is, if encrypted data gets stolen, you don't even have to report because it's encrypted. What's the problem? Well, now we understand there could be a problem, and just because something got exfiltrated doesn't necessarily mean the attacker is hanging on to it for later, but they might be. And it would be good to know that, or at least good to be prepared for that possibility, and maybe even prepare your clients for that possibility. So yeah, scary stuff, but all the more reason to get serious about it sooner versus later.
Wow. All right, Rich, you ready to pivot to something a little less scary?
Yeah, I don't know. Is this, or is this not less scary? This is your tip of the week, Eric, and it has to do with an issue that every MSP out there has to be thinking about all the time. There are a lot of MSPs in the business. There's undoubtedly a number of other MSPs in your geography. What is it you're talking about to our audience this week?
Well, Rich, it's a topic that we've talked about before on the show, and it's really about building and maintaining a competitive differentiation in your market against the other MSPs and folks that, are vying for the same clients that you are. And so 3 quick things to think about, Rich. Number 1, again, it's something that we've covered before, but I'm going to add a couple little extra nuances. So developing that niche expertise is valuable. Focusing on a specific vertical market or a specific competency that creates this uniqueness about who you are. I was just speaking with a client, an MSP client of ours, Rich, yesterday at MSP Mastered, and she focuses specifically on the education vertical. So she knows exactly what the pain points are, what the value proposition is, what the budget cycles are, how E-rate works, and what percentage of E-rate can cover her services, and how to develop a proposal to present those services and close that business. I have had a couple of other clients in the past, Rich, that had had that kind of experience, but the vast majority of MSPs that I work with are not focused on the education market. They're focused in other markets. So find your niche, find a competency. We just talked about encryption and getting clients ready for Q Day. I mean, if we start early enough, there's probably some opportunity for MSPs to differentiate themselves, leading with that message. I always say, Rich, leading with cybersecurity, leading with compliance is kind of where we're at. pretty soon we're going to be leading with AI and helping clients, get all that great business intelligence, leveraging AI and creating platforms and training them on how to do that. We've talked about that on the show as well. So number one, that niche expertise is a distinguishing differentiator for you. I said that was almost alliteration, right? Number two, now this is something that we joke about sometimes, right, Rich, where we say, oh, well, everybody says that, we have the best technicians, we deliver the best customer experience, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But very rarely do we have the evidence to prove that. So the outstanding customer experience is something that you can work on. You can get testimonials from your clients. You can get reviews from your clients. I know some MSPs. I have another client that we work with, Rich, that has 55-star ratings on Google for their business. That takes a lot of effort and energy. That means that when you screw something up, Rich, you make sure that client feels like you're, moving heaven and earth to fix it so that they give you 5 stars. So outstanding customer experience, deliver the evidence. Deliver the evidence. I think that's a distinguishing factor. We say that, but here's the proof. That's really hard to argue with when folks are searching for their next provider and they see an organization that has that much goodwill from their clients, right? It's a great way to move forward in that sales process. The third one, Rich, is kind of what I love doing, leveraging thought leadership. So how do you build distinction and differentiation from every other MSP? Get out there, get on podcasts, speak at events, publish articles and blog posts, and make it thought leadership. If your target audience is the SMB, then talk about the things that are pain points for SMBs. Give real value without asking for anything in return. This is what thought leadership, this approach means, Rich, is I'm going to give you all these, like these tips of the week. We're giving you all these tips of the week because we know that by doing that, you will get some value, listeners, target audience, and we will build the trust and confidence in you that when you need our help, you'll give us a call. You'll reach out to our website. The same thing applies with you as an MSP, building that thought leadership, becoming an expert in cybersecurity, quantum computing and qubits, Rich, AI, and writing articles about that and getting that out to your clients. Newsletter is a great way to publish that, as well as if you're doing a digital newsletter, an email newsletter to all your existing clients and prospects, replicate that newsletter on LinkedIn. I do that all the time. And you're getting that exposure and you're building or you're solidifying your position as a thought leader in your industry, which pays many dividends when you're adding all these 3 tips up, Rich, should help you win more business against your competitors.
Yeah, you're getting visibility as an expert as opposed to somebody who's very annoying because they're constantly promoting themselves. And when somebody, has a need or is in trouble in some way, they want help from an expert. And if you are visible that way, they will think of you at that moment. I also love the specialization point there. I will point out that is not only a competitive differentiator, but I've written many times through the years about the fact that if you look for the things that high growth MSPs tend to have in common, specialization of that sort is one of those. So that is a growth driver, both because it's a competitive differentiator and just in general, it drives referrals and all sorts of good stuff. But I really want to zero in on the customer experience thing, Eric, because right at the beginning of the day here at this Evergreen Services group that I'm attending here, 2 people from that organization came on stage and they were kind of setting things up by talking about 5 trends in the industry that are really important for MSPs in the audience to be thinking about. Was AI one of those? Absolutely. Was cybersecurity one of those? Absolutely. What was number 1 on the list? Customer experience. That was the thing, the number 1 thing they really wanted you to be thinking about is that you need to be creating an end-to-end journey, a customer experience from the very first contact all the way through to renewal and beyond, that sets you apart from everybody else. That's what drives growth. That's what drives retention and loyalty. And it's interesting to have my day bookended by hearing that first thing in the morning and then hearing it again now as we record this podcast episode.
Yeah, Rich, if we don't keep our clients happy and satisfied, we will be churning and churning and churning. And we don't want to lose those clients that we've worked so hard to acquire, right? And, we're going to talk about marketing in a minute with Nancy Henriquez. And, I'm sure she's going to be sharing some tips on how to, create budgets and deploy budgets for marketing and things like that. Well, guess what? If we're spending all that money on marketing, Rich, and we are churning customers, then we are going the wrong direction. So yeah, that at the end of the day, that customer experience and satisfaction is super, super important. And like I said, it's not enough just to say it, but if you're actively working diligently to deliver that, then your clients should be delighted to give you testimonials and gold stars.
Well, without further ado, let's bring Nancy in on the show here. She is somebody both of us have known for a long time. She has been an MSP at a number of organizations. She's worked on the vendor side of things. She has acquired a lot of expertise along the way in marketing and sales and operations. These days, she is sharing that expertise with MSPs out there through a new venture called Sibyl Consulting. So Eric and I are going to take a quick break here. When we come back momentarily here, we will be joined by Nancy Henriquez of Sibyl Consulting to talk a little bit about marketing, sales, and operations. Stick around, folks. It's coming right up. And welcome back to part 2 of this episode of the MSP Chat Podcast, our Spotlight interview segment, where we are pleased to be joined by someone we have known for a long time and in many roles. Today, she is the CEO of Sibyl Consulting. Her name is Nancy Henriquez. Nancy, welcome to the show.
Hey, Rich. Hey, Eric. Thank you guys for having me.
Good having you.
So, like I say, Eric and I have known you for a while. We've known you in different roles and capacities. So tell folks a little bit about who you are and what you have done in the past, but also what you're doing with Sibyl Consulting these days.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I feel like I'm one of the oldest and youngest people in the channel all at the same time. But I started my career out, as you guys well know, out of high school and joined a break fix company or an IT computer repair shop right out of high school, and then started my own business entrepreneurship career at 22, thinking that I could do it better on my own. And geez, those were some days, let me tell you. But then after that, I went on to transition my break fix business to the MSP model. I exited that business, then went on to run the MSP that acquired mine, and been in the channel for about 20 years now. Hard to believe. A little over 20 years now, so it's crazy. And now with Sibyl Consulting Group, I wanted to take all of the experience that I've had over the last 20 years and not just within the MSP space, but then also everything that I've learned through all of the education that has been provided to me through other communities, and bring that all in to help MSPs grow their businesses. And so Sibyl Consulting Group, I like to say, is a growth agency, and we help with marketing, sales, or operations. Wherever the bottleneck is, we help to undo that and get things moving again.
Yeah, and those are 3 areas where a lot of MSPs want and need help: marketing, sales, and operations. Let's start out with marketing, because if there's anything that MSPs don't feel terribly confident about, in my experience, it's marketing. What are some of the most common marketing mistakes, maybe, that you see MSPs make?
Oh, that is such a huge question. Such a large question to start off with. But the very first and biggest mistake that I see people make is market themselves, not market to their audience. And so that's two different approaches, right? And primarily speaking, we need to really hone in on who our client is and how do they listen? How do they speak? How do they understand things? And that's one of the places where we go so wrong because we start off with the technical or what we know, what we want to say, not necessarily what our customers want to hear. So that's I would say one of the biggest mistakes that we do in our industry for sure.
Yeah, I can definitely empathize with that, Nancy. And it's one of those things where we always used to say it's not a me conversation, right? Or it's not a me message, it's a you message. It should be about the client and their needs, right? And like you're right, it's kind of like speeds and feeds. And I remember the days when, back before managed services and everybody was showing up with, business cards with just a bunch of, acronyms and stuff on them and all their certifications and all that. And that's what they thought their value proposition was, right? Kind of crazy.
Yeah.
But I'm going to
Well,
ask you
to
about
this day,
you.
it's still like that.
Well, not for your clients. So, just want to be sure we lay that out. But one of your services is really interesting because it's something that I think a lot of MSPs don't think about either. It's designed to align the MSP's onboarding process to what their marketing message is and what they say during the sales conversation. And I remember using that as kind of a distinction and a differentiator when I had my MSP is like, we definitely doubled down on how different and distinct we were from a marketing perspective, but then we had to also make sure that we delivered on that promise, right, when we were onboarding the clients. So expand on that for us and tell us how you see it and how you help your clients with that.
Yeah, so hey, all goes right back to the very first mistake that was talking about, just not listening, right? And so a lot of the times when we create our onboarding or we're bringing on customers, we're not necessarily looking at if they're the right customer, if they're the right fit. And so that makes then onboarding them one of the hardest things possible. And a lot of the times we find that where your marketing message needs to that's where you come in and listen to your audience. Two, you speak to them in the way that they understand. And then three, when it comes to your sales process, now you have to make sure that your marketing is aligned with your sales because your sales is the ones that are going to carry that amplified message and really bring in the personalized touch to the process. And then once you make sure that your sales is aligned, that they're speaking to the right things that hooked these people in to begin with your marketing message, then comes in the operations and the onboarding aspect of it. And we find that there's a lot of just friction in those areas because marketing will say, let's say, whatever message that they say, and then sales will give certain promises. And then those promises may not necessarily align with your capabilities or your what your actual process is when now you're onboarding someone and bringing them on to service them. And so for me, it's about making sure that when you are thinking about growing your sales, that your onboarding is down packed for that client that you are talking to at the very beginning with your marketing message. And if it's not aligned, then your texts are going to run into issues. You're going to run into communication issues with them in terms of what their expectations are, and so on. So those are some of the biggest things that we see. And when they're not aligned, it's usually because it's not the right customer fit.
Nancy, I want to ask you about budgeting for marketing, and I want to ask about it along two different dimensions, actually. One being money, but the other being time. What sort of guidelines would you provide to an MSP in our audience in terms of how much money they should be setting aside for marketing and how much of their time?
That's a great question. So when it comes to the budget, I always take a look at, what are your growth goals and what are your current opportunities? And so, if you have, let's say, you're able to find an opportunity, even within your own business, that is, let's say, a $10,000 project, 10% of that should have been in your marketing budget. Um, and so that's where we're coming in and saying, at least have 10% of your goals in your marketing budget. And then beyond that, it's how you use that budget. So a lot of the times people want to throw money at SEO or a certain thing. And that's where I think a lot of mistakes come into play instead of actually looking at an actual strategy and where can your funds go further, whether that be in digital media, whether that be investing in creating a podcast so that you can reach a certain audience that way, whether that be events that you're hosting, whatever that strategy may be, is where now that budget becomes more invaluable and more important. And the time aspect of it, a lot of the times the mistake that we think is like, if I build it, people will come. And that's not how it actually goes. And I know this by experience because I've been there, done that. Oh, where I did all of this stuff and then I waited for the phone to ring and crickets. It was just crickets. So the time aspect of it really comes into play at the very beginning of the process in my mind. If you invest a lot of time in really identifying that ideal client, then moving that along to how you're going to solve their problem, really focusing on the not just the solution, but the process behind the solution, then a lot of the strategies then naturally come into play with who you are and who your customers are. And so the time then becomes more so of, do you want to speed it up in terms of growth? And that has some budget along with it. Or are you going to want to do this yourself? And then, that's going to take some time to implement. And one of the things that a lot of people don't realize is how long it takes to build a funnel. And so I always tell people, if you want to build a robust funnel, it's going to be 18 months minimum, 6 months before you start to see your first, your first conversion over. And that shocks people sometimes, but it takes a lot of time, energy, and dollars.
That makes a lot of sense, Nancy. When you're starting off with just cold outreach, right? It takes a while to build out. Yeah, we know all about sales funnels at Channel Mastered, right, Rich? So let me ask you this, Nance. Back in the before times, right, when we had our MSP practices, marketing used to be kind of relegated to like direct mail, postcards. When email started really kind of being used as a tool, we saw some of that. And today we're hearing all kinds of different things like, these terms like omni-channel marketing and all this. What techniques, from your experience, tend to work best? And how many different techniques should an MSP use? Maybe give us kind of where to start and maybe, what an ideal kind of a set of techniques or marketing channels would look like for an MSP that wants to grow. Let's say that they can budget that 10% like you recommend.
Yeah, so I don't like to come in and say, these are the things that you should be doing. I feel like that is very personal when it comes to your marketing strategy. And that has a lot to do with, I go back to that client, knowing who your client is. But then also who you are and what you're comfortable doing, what your current skills are, what they are and where they're currently at and what you're willing to do. right? And a lot of that, I feel I come from that because I had to overcome a lot of social anxiety and a lot of public speaking fears in order for me to get to a place where I wanted to be able to speak to my audience via videos, podcasts just like this, as well as in person during events and things like that. And so I knew that I needed to overcome something personally in order for me to get to that point of being able to even execute any kind of strategy. So I don't like to come in and say these are the things that you should be doing. I think it's very personal. And so when it comes to the actual strategy, start with what you're comfortable with and what you're comfortable that you can do repeatedly and get used to that and then move on to the next thing. So if like let's say a lot of us are introverts and some of us don't want to go through the process of overcoming some of those fears, but if what you're comfortable with is, writing down some really valuable content that can help someone and putting that on LinkedIn, those are things that are really helpful and can create some of that movement happening, some of that, getting people to know you. Beyond that, I would say, omni-channel really comes down to do you have a massive audience that you need to get to in that way? Do you have all those dollars to be able to um, invest in all of these different areas? If not, then I would recommend sticking to one to two platforms that that you're comfortable with, that your audience is in, and that you can actually continue to work on a consistent basis. Um, so that's what I say. For me, as an example, I currently am working on LinkedIn and on YouTube, and those are my two preferred platforms. And I do a lot of speaking now, but it's not how it started off. I started off with very small types of marketing. I started off with lunch and learns within my local area. I did a lot of education, and that's primarily what I like to focus on is educating, because I also wasn't comfortable with selling in that way, right? So that's where a lot of it comes back to what are you comfortable with, and then what do you need to work on in order to grow that aspect with you.
Eric was saying before, Channel Mastered works with clients on sales funnels, just like Sibyl Consulting does. There's something else actually that we work with our clients, that is something that you work on with your clients as well. And that's identifying an ideal customer profile, or an ICP. And I strongly suspect, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but there are probably a lot of MSPs in our audience who say, yeah, I've got an ICP. It's anybody with money, basically. But that is not, in fact, what an ideal customer profile should be for an MSP. So help folks understand what is an ICP, and also why does every MSP in our audience need to have one?
Yeah. So our ICP is usually directly tied to our unique selling proposition. And so that's why it's really important to get crystal clear as to who that ideal client is. And when we look at it in that way, in the lens of this can directly relate to my unique selling proposition, that then speaks to how you differentiate yourself. Ooh, big word there. From other MSPs. And so I like to play a little game when it comes to trying to figure this out, ultimately speaking, especially for those MSPs that already have a client base. Who's your favorite client? That's the very like simple question that I can give in terms of trying to figure out who is your ideal client. Who is your favorite client? Who do you enjoy answering their calls? You never say, "Oh my God, it's Sally calling. I don't want to pick it up." They directly reflect something that you enjoy doing, that you're really great at, and that you have a particular skill that you may have picked up here or there. For example, I can give the example of me with my MSP, and when I came to the realization of my ICP, I was living in Houston at the time. That's where my MSP was based out of, and we're in the medical fields, right? The Houston is one of the largest medical centers in the U.S., and so there's a lot of private doctors. And then I realized that it wasn't just private doctors; they are women-owned private practices that really related to me and that were some of my top clients. And from there, I was able to really hone in on what made them so special to me and what made them my favorite at the end of the day. And from there, I built out an entire profile based off of their characteristics, their similarities, everything that brought them together. And so I looked for all those patterns and then categorized them as my A clients. And that became really important because that's how I then differentiated my MSP through the messaging that I would say in order to speak directly to women-owned private healthcare practices. So that's how I did it.
Nancy, I love how you kind of just simplify it, right? Because a lot of MSPs, like, they make, we're, so a recovering MSP like yourself, right? So we are problem solvers, right? So we always think like, and sometimes we get into this most complicated way to look at something and think about it. I love how you kind of boil it down to almost hey, who would I enjoy spending time with if they weren't a client, right? That kind of, I love that. So, let me ask you this question. A lot of MSPs struggle, obviously, with, marketing and lead generation, like Rich alluded to. I mean, I know I suffered that way too. In my MSP practice, I didn't solve it like you did. But when does it make sense for an MSP to maybe consider outsourcing marketing or lead generation to organizations like yours? I mean, what are like if I love that if you think this way, then you might need to think about outsourcing, right?
Yeah, my question is, do you want to grow? Um, that is the main question. Do you want to grow? And so a lot of us tend to look at sale or marketing in particular and think about it in the sense of, um, I need to invest certain amount in order to get certain leads. But I tell people, let's start at the very beginning of it. And in order for anyone to know you, you have to invest in your marketing. Period. That's the baseline, is if no one knows you, no one will find you. So you have to make that investment as early on as you can. You don't have to start at that 10%. That's something that you can, work towards at the end of the day. But or at least starting off with something, whether you're doing it yourself or you're having someone in your organization do it with you, or bringing on someone at that point in time, you got to invest early on in order to make sure that you're not wasting time speaking to the wrong people, and then also looking at the wrong growth strategies. A lot of time and money is wasted early on if you don't bring in the right people at the right time in order to help you, one, just recognize some of those things. And so even if you separate it in terms of, I want to work on my go-to-market strategy and work on the marketing for that at the very beginning, rather than then, and then you could slowly move up to the actual continuation of marketing and content creation and getting real deep into that aspect of it. But ultimately, I say early on is the better place to be, just to avoid any costly mistakes that you can make by identifying the wrong ICP, which happens so often, and thinking that you are going to just throw money at certain things and letting it be that way, as opposed to making sure that someone is working alongside you, helping you to get that ICP really in line and helping you with the strategy as to where your dollars should go. and where they're going to make the most sense before you even get to the point of now thinking about something much bigger than that.
Nancy, you were talking earlier on in the conversation about aligning marketing with onboarding. Intuitively, sales and marketing should be aligned as well if you're an MSP. What advice would you offer? How should MSPs make sure that their marketing and their sales processes are in alignment?
That's a great question. So I always say your if your salespeople are not comfortable selling, and sometimes that's like you yourself, right? The MSP owner is the person that's selling it. And that means that there is a misalignment across the board. So if you're not comfortable with how you are helping people and the solutions that you are providing, then there is a complete misalignment with one, what you think you're selling. That means that you don't know what you're selling, and the message that you're putting out there and amplifying. So it, that always starts with me. It's that comfortable feeling. Like if you're not comfortable getting out there and talking to a prospect, um, that means that your messaging is off, and then you have to look at why. What is that? Is that a misalignment with your ICP? It all goes back to that. There's so much that goes back to that. Um, or are you just not comfortable with your service delivery? And because of that, then you are not so comfortable with how you're approaching your sales. So those are things that I look at, and why they're all three connected. I can't just say that one is not connected to the other. They've all got to be connected and aligned.
Yeah, it's interesting, Nancy. I think that, when we look at this interconnectivity of marketing and then sales and then service delivery, right? There's a symbiosis that has to happen there, right? So we have to onboard and then deliver service that meets the client or exceeds their expectation from what they expected from the sales process, which should be aligned with the marketing process. So if all that aligns and then we're delivering service, we have happy customers, right?
Right.
But let's talk a little bit about what needs to happen from an operations perspective that kind of powers all of this in the background. Because, some of the things that I think about are, well, yes, in order to, feel comfortable with assigning some sort of a budget for marketing, we probably first have to be profitable, right? From an operations perspective. And what you mentioned earlier was key, having the solutions that we feel that our clients, our ideal customer profile, ICP, are buying, and then having that ability to deliver the value proposition and ask for the business. So we've talked a lot about a lot of these different areas, but can you give us some guidance around, a couple of things that you look for in an MSP's business operations that you focus on?
Yeah, I'm telling you, the onboarding is a make it or break it moment for an MSP. And so that's why I tend to start off the conversation in that way, because that's very telling as far as how prepared they are for new customers. And in my mind, if you don't have a proper onboarding process, then my my question, one of my very last questions when taking on a new client, is that's coming in for marketing or for sales assistance and support, is how do you know that you can take on new clients? How comfortable are you? How confident are you in saying that you are ready for those clients? And if you are ready for those clients, what is your capacity? At that point, we're looking at what is the efficiency within the service desk. How quickly can they onboard a customer? Because if they're taking 90 days plus to onboard a new client, um, but they're signing up a new client every month, well, you're going to start to run into some operational bottlenecks. So that's where those are really the main points that I look at or that I ask when it comes to the operations aspect of it, and to see if they're ready for new business. And when they're not ready for the new business, we can tell because things will start to fall apart right at the onboarding. And that's where a lot of contention then comes in, and you'll hear customers saying, "We've been onboarding for a long time. I haven't seen this yet, or I haven't heard this from you yet," or a lot of just disorganization as the MSP is collecting information from their client as opposed to it being a seamless flow.
And just a quick comment to support what you're saying, Nancy. I think, a minute ago you talked about the disconnect between, comfort of selling, right? I think one of the major things that I found with MSPs is if the sales team has lost confidence in the service team and in the onboarding process, that's one of the reasons why they stop selling or slow things way, way down. And then you have this, empty funnel all of a sudden, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. There's no one that's at the front of the line, right? There's the customer front facing wants to take the beating at the end of it because onboarding can't happen as the way that it was promised. Like I wouldn't want to do that. So I don't want to put anyone else in that in that position as well. That's terrible.
And you know what? I'm going to insert one last quick comment too, because your remarks about onboarding in relation to sales reminded me of something I once heard Steve Alexander say. Steve's an ex-MSP. He advises MSPs now, and I once heard him say, "Don't get serious about marketing until you've got your sales right, because the last thing you want to do is generate a bunch of leads and not have anything to do with them. So make sure you've got a sales machine in place before you get serious about marketing." And you've added sort of a third variable into that equation, I think a really useful way, around onboarding. Don't get serious about the sales machine until the onboarding is right. Because if
That's
the
right.
sales team is generating lots of clients and you can't onboard them, it's going to end poorly for you. So there is a sequence here. Get good at onboarding, then ramp up sales, then ramp up marketing.
That's right. That's right. And they're all engines to be built.
Well, Nancy, really, really interesting conversation with you. Thank you so much for taking time out of a busy schedule to join us. For folks in the audience here who would like to get in touch with you or just learn more about Sibyl Consulting, where should they go?
Yeah. Best place to go is our website, sibylconsultinggroup.com. From there, you can contact us. You can have access to our Sibyl community that we're building out as well as all the other links to everywhere else you can find us.
All right. Well, Nancy, thank you very much for joining us here on the show. Folks, Eric and I are going to take a quick break here. When we come back on the other side, we'll share a few final thoughts about this interesting conversation with Nancy Henriquez of Sibyl Consulting. Have a little fun, wrap up the show. Stick around. We will be right back. And welcome back to part 3 of this episode of the MSP Chat Podcast. Always so great seeing and speaking with Nancy Henriquez. Eric, this was no exception. I want to call it, there was a lot of really great stuff in that conversation, but there's one particular thing I kind of want to zero in on. There was that point in time where we were asking her what marketing techniques are most effective, what should you really be focused on? And I think a lot of people in her position in that interview would have said something along the lines of, well, social media, that social media and LinkedIn, that's what it's all about these days, or YouTube. You really got to be on YouTube. I love what Nancy said. What Nancy said basically is whatever it is that you personally are most comfortable with. And part of why I love that is it reminded me of the advice that experts give. People will ask, experts, I want to exercise regularly. How do I get started? What exercise should I do? And very often the experts will say, the first exercise you should do is the one that you will keep doing, the one that you hate least and maybe like most. Whatever that is for you, it's going to be different for you maybe than somebody else. But do that because you will be much, much more likely to stick with it than if you force yourself to do something like running and you hate running or something like that. Same sort of thing. If you struggle to get started with marketing and to be disciplined and consistent about that, maybe, cold calling isn't your thing. Maybe you just don't like social media and it's something else. Find the thing that you can do. And whatever that is going to be the right answer for where to get started on marketing.
Rich, that's what I keyed on as well, because it was so unique, different, refreshing. And she made a comment that said something like, well, I'm the oldest person. I feel like I'm the oldest person in the channel. Or what? I'm like, that's like advice that you typically, when you're a kid, you get from like your grandpa or grandma or something. It's like this sage, wise, well, what works best for you, right? What is it that you feel comfortable doing? It's kind of like, okay. And what I would take from that and add to it is, because I know what I'm most comfortable with, Rich, and what I struggle with and I have to adapt to do. It's great when you can see things from the perspective of what are you most comfortable? What's in your comfort zone? Because yes, you're more apt to continue doing it, just like you said. But then what about all the other things that you don't like doing? Well, you've got to fill that gap with someone else, right? An outsourced organization like Nancy's, or another trusted person within your team that can kind of, that they do like doing that kind of stuff, right? So it's also about identifying what you're really, really good at. And something that we've talked about on the program before as well, Rich, is, for any business leader or anyone in any position in an organization, prioritize the things that only you can do. And if you're wearing multiple hats right now, great. But think about the thing that, what's the first hat that you're going to pass on to someone else? Is that a new hire? Is that somebody you're going to promote? Is that somebody you need to train and coach up so you can give that to them, so that you can continue focusing on the things that only you can do and you do best, I guess, is kind of the bookend to that in the way I think. And so, but what a delight having Nancy on. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a very important point you make there, Eric, that I want to underscore, that your comfort zone is a great place to start in marketing, because it makes it easier to get started and be consistent. But you don't want to live in that comfort zone forever. If and a lot of people are going to say my comfort zone is referrals. You don't necessarily want to rely exclusively on referrals forever. So challenging yourself, growing, identifying the things that you can't do, finding other people to do them. That's all very sage advice of your own, Eric. And it leaves us with time for just one last thing, ladies and gentlemen. And recently, I believe it may even have been the last episode of the show here, we were talking about some research indicating that a lot of people out there are more than willing to work for an AI boss because, among other things, as we mentioned in discussing it, there's a lot of thinking among people that, an AI boss isn't going to show preferential treatment to this person. In some ways, an AI boss will be better than the jerk I'm working for now, essentially, is what a lot of people said in responding to that survey. And, turnabout is fair play, Eric. Fair is fair. I'm going to cite some more research this week indicating that, you might prefer working for an AI, but it turns out your boss might just prefer having an AI work for him or her, because there was some research done recently by SnapLogic. They went out to 1,000 IT decision makers in 4 different countries here, and 40% of the people surveyed by SnapLogic trust AI agents, autonomous AI, more than they do human beings to do an effective job. And another 44% trust AI agents about the same as a human to do an effective job. So 40% trust the AI more, 44% about the same. That comes out to 84%, Eric, if my math is not incorrect, which means that just 16% of the IT decision makers out there, at most, trust the humans more to do an effective job than the AI. So there, folks. You don't love working for a human. The humans don't love having you working for them, apparently.
So, Rich, the fearmongers and haters of AI are right. Game over, man. Game over. It's going to replace all of us, bosses, employees, everybody.
When you're not preparing for quantum computing, you might want to prepare yourself for that possibility. Well, folks, that is all the time we've got for you this week on this episode of the show. We thank you so much for joining us here. We will be back in a week's time with another episode for you. Until then, I will just remind you, this is both a video and an audio podcast, which means that if you are listening to us right now, but you'd like to check us out on video, we are on YouTube. Look us up at MSP Chat. You'll find us there. If you are watching, but you like listening to podcasts too, sometimes go to Spotify, Apple, Google, wherever it is you get your audio podcast, you're going to find us there as well. And however you find us, please subscribe, rate, review. It's going to help other people find and enjoy the show just like you do. This program is produced by the great Russ Johns. It is edited by the great Riley Simpson. They are part of a team with us here at Channel Mastered. They are ready, willing, and able to create a podcast for you. And podcasts, trust me, are just one tiny little piece of what we do for our clients at Channel Mastered. You can learn all about that at our website, which is www.channelmastered.com. Channel Mastered has a sister organization called MSP Master. That is Eric working directly one-to-one with MSPs to help them grow and optimize their business. You can learn more about that organization at www.mspmastered.com. So once again, folks, thank you for joining us. We'll see you on the next show in a week's time. Until then, please remember, as we always ask you to, you cannot spell channel without MSP.